What did we think of those crazy Monday night games between the Titans and Dolphins and Packers and Giants? And what should you do on the Week 15 waiver wire to help you in the fantasy playoffs? We give you that advice as we continue our week of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm one of your co-hosts, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL betting and fantasy for sportingnews.com.
Hey, I'm Michelle Magdziuk, researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst for NFL.com.
Together, we're your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day. And congratulations if your fantasy football team or teams have advanced to the regular season playoffs. For some of you in smaller leagues, you might be still working to get in the playoffs. Well, we'll give you some advice in the short term on the waiver wire. So looking at it a little bit differently here. I know some of you need help at quarterback with Justin Herbert being the latest guy down, going on IR. So we'll look at some streaming options there at quarterback this week, as well as tight ends and defenses. Then look at the guys you want to look at more at running back and wide receiver. But first, Michelle, we got to get into this Monday night game. We'll do that in a moment. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Game Time. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Now, I don't know which Monday night game to start with. There were two, by the way. And I thought it was super exciting. In our Sporting News Experts League, it came down to the last possession. I'm happy to say, Michelle, thanks to Raheem Mostert, I am now the number one seed, so I get a bye. I was looking at the 3, and all these things happened at the same time, and I ended up with a 1. So I'm very happy about Raheem Mostert. He's going to get a game ball for me, as now he has an amazing season here in the regular season. But it was not just him. Let's get with that game here. How about the Titans winning the game? DeAndre Hopkins crushing it. Derrick Henry crushing it. I didn't expect this at all from the Titans, especially when they look dead with 4 minutes left in the game.
Like literally the fact that they came back. Now, if you had Miami's defense in fantasy, you were looking so good until those last 3 minutes. I know my wife lost and didn't get into the playoffs because Miami's defense ended up giving up those touchdowns at the end of the game, ruining her fantasy points on defense. But it's interesting because you never know what DeAndre Hopkins is going to give you. I mean, sometimes he gets those 12 targets in a game and goes off, and then other times he completely disappears. So he's feeling a lot like a Gabe Davis, right? Where you get a lot from him, or you can also just completely ghost you that week. Derrick Henry keeps getting it done. He's again was not efficient on the ground whatsoever, but 2 more rushing touchdowns. And the Titans schedule the rest of the way, they get Houston twice. And then I can't remember the third game in there, but it's the Seahawks, another great game for running back. So it's going to be really nice to have Derrick Henry on your roster the rest of this way.
Yeah, I mean, look, it hasn't been a great season, but who else is scoring for this team? Unless it's DeAndre Hopkins on a long play. They don't really throw the tight end. They don't throw to other people in the red zone. So it's basically Derrick Henry or DeAndre Hopkins long. That's about it. So anytime touchdowns with Derrick Henry, that's the way to go, I think, in most weeks here, if you're looking at him. But hey, touchdown scout in fantasy for 6. He gets 2. Raheem Mostert looked great. He got 2. No Jeffrey Simmons. That helped. But I like the fact that Tyjae Spears, they didn't forget about him, right? He had a nice game last week when Derrick Henry was banged up in that game. And look, he looked awesome, like catching the ball. So let's hope that he stays involved because they really need some pass catchers other than Hopkins.
Yeah, 8 targets for him, 89 receiving yards. He'll be brought up later on in this episode for our waiver segment with guys that you can pick up either this week to play or, throughout your the rest of your playoffs for fantasy. But are you getting worried about Tua? Now, he has not been consistent in the slightest this year. And what we did think we knew about him is you could play him at home, right?
Yeah.
Especially in a favorable matchup that we thought the Titans would be. isn't just bad for fantasy last night. It was horrendous. 0 touchdowns, only 240 passing yards. Luckily, he didn't have any interceptions to really, get you negative points there, but he gave you pretty much nothing. And Tyreek Hill is banged up now. We have to see if he's good to go, but it was weird the way they were having him in the game in the second half, but not really sometimes. And then didn't come back towards the end of the game when they really needed him until the last couple plays. I don't know. It was very weird, their usage. Are you worried about Tua and Tyreek moving forward?
Yeah, I'm worried about Tyreek because he just didn't look right coming back in. Like, why didn't they use him in key spots? I mean, they were trailing. They needed to get in position to try to win the game late when the Titans took the lead, and he was nowhere to be found. In fact,
then when the weirdest part to me is when they would put him on the field, then they would use him in motion, and they're making him sprint more. They're making him run more, and it's like either he's healthy enough to use him in motion, either he's just a decoy, and I understand why he'd be out there, but you have him sprinting extra and then on the sideline so much when in really important moments. It was very weird the way they used him, which makes me nervous, but he also seemed to be moving just fine. Yeah. We'll see if that, things can tighten up after you're warm. So maybe that happens to him over the next few days. This offense is completely different without Tyreek Hill, and I don't want to start Tua without Tyreek Hill out there. And then they get the Jets this week. That's not a fun matchup at all.
Yeah, and we have to see. Yeah, we'll watch Tyreek and that injury this week. They did well the first time, right? Jalen Waddle came through in a tough matchup the first time they played the Jets, but I think this game's a little bit different, right? The way that Tua is playing. Michelle, this is kind of crazy. Tua has now fallen out overall scoring out of QB1s. He's now QB 13, but average scoring, he's at QB 19. So he's kind of swapping places slowly with Trevor Lawrence. They're going in different directions here. So Trevor Lawrence might end up in the top 10, while Tua would be lucky right now to be in the top 20. And keep in mind, Michelle, it's not just that coming this week, but they also have to play the Bills in the final game if you extend your league to that. But before that, they got to play the Cowboys and Ravens. And we know he doesn't fare well against good teams with good defenses. So Tua might not be the guy you want to go to in your fantasy football playoffs. Now, Jordan Love certainly didn't look like that player. I don't know what happened. I think we kind of have an idea when Christian Watson is on the field doing his thing. Jordan Love is a good fantasy football player. When Christian Watson's not there, then they just work in these other guys. It was weird. It was here's Romeo Doubs. Here's Dontavian Wicks. Here's Samari Toure. Here's Malik Heath. And then Jane Reed has all these little micro passes being thrown to him. So where was the downfield passing? This was bad. I don't know if I can trust him, but on the bright side, you saw Tucker Kraft do something. I don't know if that's good overall for the Packers that he's the main guy, but what do you do going forward? Do you trust anything other than Jaden Reed going forward? And they're playing the Buccaneers this week.
Yeah, it's nice with Jaden Reed getting the rushing attempts, right? And he had 10 targets, but like you said, they're not targeting him down the field, which they could do. So it only turned into 27 receiving yards. Now, if you play in PPR, you got a nice 8 receptions out of it. And that's why some people hate PPR, which, when a player has this kind of game, I understand it. Luckily, he got the rushing touchdown. Yeah, it's really just Jaden Reed. I mean, but at the same time, they get the Buccaneers next week. Desmond Ridder had a good game against the Buccaneers, and Drake London had a career high game in fantasy points. So it's such a good matchup that I think you can go back to Jordan Reed. Tommy DeVito keeps getting it done for the Giants. I mean, it's not like he's putting up huge fantasy numbers, but I mean, at the same time, he had 71 rushing yards. So it's not the worst fantasy option out there. Wan'Dale Robinson had a nice game. Barkley just keeps scoring touchdowns. Really interesting on the Giants side there. They're against the Saints next week at New Orleans. I don't want to get cute there with Tommy DeVito, but again, with Jordan Love, I'm willing to go back and play him even. He looked horrendous last night. It wasn't just a bad fantasy day. He looked so incredibly bad. He could not throw an accurate pass to save his life last night.
Yeah, that's what's playing out. That's what a lot of the beat reporters said about him, that he's going to be up and down. He's going to have his highs. He's going to have his lows. They're going to be pretty high and pretty low. That's the kind of player he is right now. And he's a young quarterback and learning his way in the league. And with Tommy DeVito, what are you seeing, Michelle? You're seeing him execute the way that they wanted Daniel Jones to execute, right? Spread the ball around, lean on Saquon Barkley, run around a little bit, make plays. He had 71 rushing yards. This guy's not even that fast, but he's just doing his thing and facilitating the offense. And again, I talk about this all the time. You just want a guy that knows the system, does what's asked of him, and get your fantasy assets to do what they need, right? Jake Browning did it for the Bengals for the most part in the last couple of weeks. And now you have Tommy DeVito doing that every week. He's waking up not only Saquon Barkley, we had Jalen Hyde go off in the last game. This time it was Wan'Dale Robinson, although I think I can't trust the Giants receiver this week against the Saints.
No, and we'll talk through some wide receivers that we can trust this week and moving forward that maybe you can pick up off waivers, as well as running backs in our next segment. And then, of course, at the end of the episode, we'll talk about some streaming quarterbacks and streaming tight ends for this week to help you get through the first round of your fantasy playoffs. But first, let's talk about one of our great sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you from the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you are set. And tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. I've used this ticketing Game Time app all the time, especially when I lived in Pittsburgh. Just hop on the app on Sunday morning before the game kicks off, get cheap tickets, know where I'm sitting. Super, super easy, like they say. So snag those tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, all you have to do is create an account on the Game Time app, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so we had a good amount of injuries in week 14, right? A lot of injuries to running backs. Even if you go back to week 13, Brian Robinson Jr. was dealing with that hamstring injury. Josh Jacobs gets banged up. Alexander Mattison gets banged up. We had Isaiah Pacheco miss the game this last week. So, there's some options out there in waivers, and you might have to use one of these guys. So let's just hit on Antonio Gibson first here with the Commanders, because we don't know yet if Brian Robinson Jr. will be back. It was a hamstring injury. Those can linger. Against the Rams, Jets, and 49ers the last 3 weeks. How sure are you on him, and is he a priority pickup for you this week?
Well, I'm concerned the Commanders are out of it, right? So they may want to look at Chris Rodriguez Jr. as well to see what they have, if he need to reevaluate the position. Gibson, they've been hot and cold on. Look, the game script should also call for him potentially to see some catches, and that's good news, right? In your half point, full point PPR, he can give you some value that way. So Gibson's not the worst. I think he's a little bit more appealing than some of these other guys that we look at on the waiver wire. We saw the Jerick McKinnon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire mess. Like, you got a touchdown out of McKinnon, but that's the only way that either of them are going to have value. CH just does not look good. So you don't want that situation, right? Where water's down and you have Gibson and Rodriguez and there's nobody there that you can look at. And Michelle, I got to tell you, I'm also not hot on this situation. I know Josh Jacobs is hurt. I don't know if I could play Zamir White or Amir Abdullah. I don't want a part of this Raiders offense after they scored no points, and Aiden O'Connell's just been terrible of late.
Yeah, I know. They really should probably just stuck it out with Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think it would have been as bad. Like, they were really hasty with that decision, right? It was like Jimmy Garoppolo got to come back one game and you're like, you know what, you're done for the year. It's Aiden O'Connell. I do think this offense might move a little bit better with Jimmy Garoppolo in her center. But Josh Jacobs is dealing with a quad injury. They play on Thursday Night Football, so he does not have much time to recover at all. So there is a chance he could miss this game. Also, they're not really playing for anything. So Jacobs, he still needs that big contract after the season. Why push your body through that? But they get the Chargers. It's a nice matchup, right? I do think Amir Abdullah would be the way to go over Zamir White. I think they would trust the veteran a little bit more. He seems to be the next guy up. I'm open to it. Would you rather go with Zamir White or Jerick McKinnon against the Patriots?
I think I would go Jerick McKinnon. Here's why. I think they're going to try to take away Travis Kelce, and McKinnon in the running game could do some damage there. We saw there were some opportunities that didn't really come too much to fruition with Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, but you can run on the Patriots, and you can do that a little bit better. So McKinnon, we know he's been useful. He's a touchdown guy, so I would go in that direction. Also being attached to Patrick Mahomes, even though he's struggling and he's barely a QB1 now, he's still way better than in an offense with Aiden O'Connell. So I would go there, but again, you're maybe touchdown dependent on him, where Emil Abdullah, you might have a floor with some receptions or something of that sort.
Yeah, at least with the Raiders, though, they shouldn't get blown out, right, by the Chargers because it's Easton
We think.
Stick playing. So there should be a lot of running on both sides. What about a game that should be pretty good this week? Bengals versus the Vikings. Now, we saw obviously Joe Mixon's the lead back, and he's going to get his, and he's going to be good. But what about Chase Brown? I mean, over the last 2 weeks, he had a good rushing game in week 13, and then in week 14, he got it done in the receiving game. His snaps have gone up each week over the last 3 weeks. He's getting on the field more. How desperate would you have to be to start Chase Brown? And another guy similar is Tajay Spears, right? They're more of that receiving back or that guy that comes in and spells the lead back. Who would you rather go with, Tajay Spears or Chase Brown off of waivers this week or for the rest of the year?
Yeah, look at Chase Brown. I mean, he's pretty much now filling that Samaje Perine role, right? Occasionally receiving, making some plays, taking pressure off Joe Mixon. They've been waiting for him to be healthy. So he's there, but I don't know if you can count on him making a big play in the past game to score. And his usage was still limited, right? Very limited in relation to Joe Mixon. So I would get Chase Brown, especially if I have Mixon, to make sure I lock it up here down the stretch. Mixon's an older back. He could break down at any time, and you want to be prepared because Chase Brown would then have really good RB1 top 12 potential, right? If he had the backfield to himself. So I think if you're in a position to stash and say, okay, if something goes there that I can really have a great asset, then you go in that direction. But if you need someone that you can actively play in a flex spot, I look at Tajay Spears. Again, the usage you cannot ignore the past couple weeks. They realize, look, we need to get our young playmakers involved. They don't have a lot more in the passing game, as I mentioned, other than Hopkins. So, look, Spears, the matchup is good enough as well. If you look at it by the numbers, the Vikings a little bit tougher up front. And then you look at the Texans, can give up those numbers in their zone defense with reception. So, and also a chance maybe CJ Stroud plays, and then that turns into a negative game script potentially. And then Spears is golden. So that's how I break it down between Spears and Brown this week.
Yeah, and you might be able to start the other running back in that Bengals game on the other team, right? Ty Chandler, if Alexander Madison is out, or even if he's not, right? He's dealing with an ankle injury. Like, they're not going to feed him the ball, right? Ty Chandler's playable. It's a good matchup against the Bengals. Definitely someone that you can pick up and play this week and feel pretty good about it. And then after that, it gets the Lions and the Packers. You might be able to lean on Ty Chandler for the rest of the year. One more running back that's a little bit more iffy because his workload is not at all safe. It's Keaton Mitchell for the Ravens. We know he's super productive and efficient. Gets the Jaguars, 49ers, Dolphins last 3 weeks. Are you able to trust Keaton Mitchell in your starting lineups in the fantasy playoffs?
Well, look at these guys, right? We talked about Chase Brown, Tajay Spears, Keaton Mitchell. We've talked about Devin Achan. Now, these guys are explosive players, right? And they can blow up with any play, but they also have a downside, right? If they don't get enough touches, they're done. And this is what happened with Mitchell last few weeks, right? He's not getting enough work here. You can't depend on just being a big play running back, right? People are going to figure it out at some point. So I just don't like the matchup either. The Jaguars are pretty good against the run. It wasn't all that exciting for Kareem Hunt and Jerome Ford last week. So I kind of look at that combination. So I'm not feeling it with Keaton Mitchell. And look, we'll have to talk about Devin Achan a little bit when we break down our running back rankings. And he didn't do a lot there. But maybe it's, again, we get excited about these big play guys, but eventually it's going to cool down and regress to the mean a bit.
Yeah, and then talking about another Ravens guy, though, moving on to wide receivers, I think Odell Beckham Jr. at this point, is it becoming a good flex play, right? He disappeared in week 12, the week before the Ravens bye, but in 4 of the last 5 games, he's been a really solid play for the Ravens. Has scored 3 touchdowns over that time as well. Gets the Jaguars, 49ers, not the best matchup, but Dolphins. Like, these should all be higher scoring games. And Odell Beckham Jr. is looking like OBJ. They got completely back to old OBJ, but he's looking really fast and good. And he seems to be a guy that Lamar really trusts in this offense.
The key, Michelle, is keep putting him in revenge games or primetime games. This guy always plays with a little chip on his shoulder. So Thankfully, the game's at night for him again, so he wants to show up at night, and I don't think that's kind of underselling it a little bit. He's a guy who kind of gets motivated, right? He did well against the Browns. He did well against the Rams, two of his former teams. Unfortunately, he's not playing the Giants the rest of the way to really stick it to them, but I'll take it. Prime time against a weak secondary. He's making plays. He's involved in Zay Flowers. He's clearly their number two out of Rashad Bateman, and really – maybe you're 2A, 2B with Isaiah Likely. So check out if he's there. But this passing game I like now. It's going through Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham Jr., Isaiah Likely, and get away these running backs from this mix. Let Lamar throw it to these guys, and you're going to keep seeing those values and the scoring go up here for the Ravens.
Yeah, absolutely. And then two other wide receivers that they feel like the same kind of guy, right? They have big potential. They could also just stink it up. Noah Brown and Zay Jones. Yeah. Now, Noah Brown has 0 receptions in each of the last 2 games, right? But at the same time, you have Tank Dell out. You have Nico Collins' calf injury. He was out that pretty much the entire game in week 14. We'll see if he can come back. But they get the Titans this upcoming week. We've seen the potential with him. Highly, highly risky, but he might be a necessity. And then with Zay Jones, 14 targets last week, and then 8 targets in week 13. So he's being targeted heavily by Trevor Lawrence. They get the Ravens, but then the Buccaneers the week after. So just something to keep in mind there. That could be a huge game for him. These are 2 guys that you could pick up off waivers. Know that they're super risky, but they both do have really high upside.
Yeah, Brown, there's a reason he had 0 the last 2 weeks. Who are the 2 best pass defenses right now in the NFL against wide receivers? They're those 2 teams he just played, the Broncos and the Jets. So the Titans are not that team, right? They gave up some good yardage to Jalen Waddle. Maybe Tyreek Hill had been healthy. He might have done something there. So that's good. So don't look at those zeros. Look at the matchup ahead and the usage. And Noah Brown is a play this week. Now, Zay Jones, if you've got a bye in the playoffs, and I'm talking to myself here, and you're hurting at the 3rd wide receiver spot, look ahead because that matchup is fantastic for Zay Jones. Yep. You're playing off what they can do with Calvin Ridley. And look, he's going to have to see key targets with Evan Ingram. And that's what the result was with the Christian Kirk injury. So I don't love Zay Jones this week, even though the Rams had some success against this Ravens team. But next week, he's the play. But if you need a guy this week, I think it's Noah Brown.
Yeah, I agree with you. But yeah, that was a great point about the bye week. If you have a bye week, Zay Jones is a definite must pick up for you because love that Buccaneers matchup for him. And then really quickly here to just end this segment for wide receivers, Josh Palmer's should be back from IR. Was he back last week? No, this will be his first week actually playing, right? But Easton Stick's going to be his quarterback. It's the Raiders, Bills, Broncos. Not great matchups. And also, it's Easton Stick, not Justin Herbert. Palmer was doing his thing before injury. I don't really want to deal with that. No. Too low of a ceiling, too low of a floor as well.
Yeah, poor Keenan Allen. So that's all I'm going to say. Like, it's not good. Yeah. So the Chargers, I mean, it's going to be Austin Eckler show. I'll say that. It'll be good for him down the stretch here because they're going to have to use him a ton because there's nothing else to kind of save their season. Curtis Samuel, he's another guy you could pick up there as well. He's still out there in a lot of leagues, and he just keeps producing for the Commanders. So something to watch there as well as a player that's available and can help your team. And we're looking at wide receiver 3s and flexes with all these guys as well. Now, before we close the show looking at our streamers at quarterback and tight end and defense, it's time to hear from another one of our fine sponsors. All right, we do the show around lunchtime very often here, and we're busy. Michelle and I, Monday and Tuesday, forget it. We're just working, prepping stuff for you guys, prepping stuff for other jobs, getting ready for fantasy and looking at the numbers for the next week. And it can be tough to get out and get what we need. We need some nourishment. We need some energy. Well, DoorDash is going to take care of us. And I like that fact is they are there for us when we need things, not just from our favorite local spots, whether it's pizza or wings, whatever we think we would like to eat while we're writing about football, or anything that the grocery store would have to offer, chips, dips, some adult beverages that you might need to get through on your Sunday game day, they're going to be there for you. And now you can get 50% off up to $10 value when you spend 15 or more on your first order when you download their DoorDash app. Enter promo code LOCK23. Check it out. Yeah, it's a great deal to get started with DoorDash, and they're going to take care of you again. Whatever you need, almost everything you can think of there to keep you going and energized, whether it's a game day or sometime in the middle of the week, your work day, they're going to take care of you. So check it out, DoorDash. There, download the DoorDash app and enter the promo code LOCK23. You'll save up to $10 when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Again, LOCK23 for 50% off, up to a $10 value. First order there on the DoorDash app. Just spend $15 or more. Subject to change. Terms do apply. All right, Michelle, we will get into the streamers here at the key positions where we're looking for some one-week plays at quarterback, tight end, and defense. But I do have to tell you, on this network, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Michelle, let's go down the streaming quarterbacks. Yep, we got to do this because we lost yet another quarterback here, Justin Herbert. So Joe Flacco has been an absolute heater in his first two games as a Brown. He gets the Bears at home this week. Matthew Stafford, maybe the best matchup of the entire week for anybody and the most confidence that we might have all of a sudden against the Commanders at home. Russell Wilson facing a Lions defense that can't stop anything. And Geno Smith, a lot of people could have dropped him with the Drew Lock start last week, but Geno Smith gets the Eagles home on Monday night. So talk about these options. I think they're all pretty viable here, especially depending on the size of your league with Herbert out.
Yeah, and if no one picked up Jake Browning, that would obviously be a top pickup as well. But I think Matthew Stafford, if he's out there against the Commanders, you can't find a guy that's performing better over the last 3 weeks with a nicer matchup. The Commanders are allowing the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Stafford has 3 straight games of 23 plus fantasy points. So ride that wave with him in this amazing matchup. If he's out there, that's a great play. I mean, he should be a top 6-7 quarterback again in fantasy this week. Joe Flacco, I don't know personally if I can go into my fantasy playoffs and play Joe Flacco, but I am telling you, I am considering it in one of my leagues. It's the first round of playoffs. I might have to do it. I have Kyler Murray and Justin Fields. I hate both of their matchups this week. Justin Fields is in the same game, right? The Bears have allowed 24 passing touchdowns this season, third most in the league. They have been better as of late, but Joe Flacco has been getting it done. Russell Wilson has not really doing anything for fantasy, but at the same time has an amazing matchup against the Lions, allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game. He's not very risky, right? You know you're going to get 15 to 18 points from him. So if that's all you need because you have a stacked team elsewhere, solid play there. Geno Smith, it all just comes down to his injury, right? Just keep an eye on his injury. Is he practicing in full? Is he good to go after sitting out 1 week? Because we just saw him have a great game against the Cowboys. We know how much the Eagles are giving up to quarterbacks. It just all comes down to how healthy is he. So I'll be keeping an eye on his injury reports.
Yeah, what I like about this, and I always talk about this, I always rank quarterbacks that are playing each other quite close, right? If one guy's throwing, the other guy has to throw, or if one guy's running and putting up points, the other guy has to do something. So I do like that, right? These guys are essentially playing against viable fantasy quarterbacks on the other side. You have Joe Flacco, and Justin Fields may struggle a bit passing, but he's a running asset, right? That could put up some points and force Flacco to throw a little bit in that game. And then Matthew Stafford's got Sam Howell. I think it could be a bit of a shootout there, right? That's a pretty high total in that game. So that's great for Stafford. It's not just the matchup, but you might have some resistance from Howell. And then Russell Wilson, they're probably going to give up a lead there with the run defense against the Lions. So that's good against Jared Goff. And Geno Smith, obviously, if he starts, he's going to get Jalen Hurts on the other side, and he has a really good matchup. So I love that. Look for those situations where you can get some cheap volume no matter what on top of the matchup. So I like that. Now, tight ends is pretty sparse, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
If you're looking for streamers, actually a lot of the top ones have great matchups, and starting with TJ Hawkinson and Sam Laporta this week. But, man, if you're hurting for streaming tight ends, I would maybe look again to that Commanders-Rams game. Davis Allen looked really good last week. Actually, was used a lot more than Tyler Higbee as kind of the third target. And Logan Thomas, a very good matchup against the Rams. Isaiah Likely went off against them last week. So maybe that's where you start if you're looking for streaming help.
Yeah, Tyler Higbee, I'm not sure if he's supposed to come back this week or not, but if he misses again, Davis Allen is the way to go if you're desperate for a tight end, right? I'm not like saying I feel great about him, but if you don't have tight end right now because either they're injured or you haven't really had a solid one all year long, Davis Allen is a viable option. Logan Thomas is only an okay option because the Rams are giving up the third most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Besides that, he's not been consistent at all, and he hasn't really shown that high of a ceiling since like week 5. It's all been pretty just not very exciting for him the rest of the way. But again, if you have a stacked team everywhere else, which you would have to have if you're in the playoffs and you don't have a good tight end, then you would think the rest of your team is pretty stacked. If you just need those safe 8, 7, 9 points, Logan Thomas is a fine add. Then there's like Cade Otton or Tanner Hudson. That's pretty much your next best bets. And it's not great. Those aren't really options I'm feeling at all, but maybe in DFS.
Well, look, you're just basically pulling the slot machine back and hoping that they sneak their way into the end zone. They both scored here in week 14. So that's essentially, and look, when you start with 6 points at tight end, you're in business for the most part. So that's the way it goes at that position. Now, defenses, I have a little bit better news, Michelle. There's a lot out there. And again, we can go back to that Rams game, right? The Commanders do give up sacks. Aaron Donald's on the field, so that's a good spot. But you really also like the Colts again, Michelle. I think this is unfortunate because you're a Steelers fan. You probably don't want them to do too well. But I'll just say this. I also like the Steelers on the other side of the Colts this week. I think they're going to have to come through with a big defensive performance. I mean, Mike Tomlin has got to be fed up here. Let's hope TJ Watt clears concussion protocol, though.
Yeah, that is so TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith are both in concussion protocol. If they miss or if TJ Watt misses, it's really not worth the risk. I mean, we also thought against the Patriots and against the Cardinals, great matchups for the Steelers defense. And guess what? It wasn't. And for Indy, though, that defense, great matchup. Mitch Trubisky loves to throw interceptions. Like Kenny Pickett was pretty safe with the ball. Mitch Trubisky will throw at least put 3 balls out there that the Colts could intercept. We'll see if they come down with them. So a great matchup for them. The Bears against Cleveland. Again, I know Joe Flacco's looking good, but it's still Joe Flacco. And the Bears defense has been much better. Montez Sweat is actually giving them a pass rush. So interested in the Bears. And then another option, Falcons against the Panthers. The Panthers offense is atrocious. And the Falcons can come down with some interceptions or sacks on Bryce Young this week.
Yeah, it's a good call there. Then the Saints played really well against that Panthers defense last week. They're an option, even though Tommy DeVito has played well. They're at home. And then either side, if you look at that Patriots-Chiefs matchup, the Patriots defense is actually playing really well. The Chiefs offense isn't. So it could be sneaky good. And then the Chiefs on the other side of that against the Patriots, that could be a sneaky low-scoring game this week. And then one more I'm going to mention just because people might be trying to bench them this week. It's the Cowboys. Look, you said about interceptions. Josh Allen throws interceptions in every game, and this is a matchup for the Cowboys. So if you're thinking about benching the Cowboys or someone sillily drops them, right, they're going to look at the schedule and say, oh, I don't want to play them against them or the Dolphins. Go pick them up and play them, even though the numbers may not say yes, but the interception opportunities will be there. So it really comes down to that. Know your scoring system and help yourself out. And then Michelle, I have to say the Dolphins, they're also playing really well. So have them there against the Jets is another option. So a lot of streaming defenses, not so much for the streaming tight ends this week, it looks like, Michelle.
Yeah, and that's just how it comes to the tight end position. And the Dolphins, they've been a fantastic fantasy defense. If they're out there, they shouldn't be. I know they ended up allowing a couple touchdowns at the end of that game on Monday Night Football, but they've been scoring touchdowns a ton too and getting those turnovers. So really great option. Again, Colts are just number 1. Just pick up Colts. The rest of their schedule is amazing. If they're still out there, they shouldn't be. You should have listened to us last week, picked them up if they were available. But yeah, that's for your waiver show this week, and we'll help you with your rankings on Wednesdays and Thursdays show to get you ready for your fantasy playoffs. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's an exciting time of year, but I'll just have to sit back, have a bye, so I'll have to figure it out in one league.
For you.
Yeah. Well, look, it's there's a couple others that I had some bad luck in. So look, I'll take the bye this week and enjoy it in one league that I have a good shot at winning a lot. So I really enjoy that. And look, it's a time of year again. big piece of advice here. Even if you're not playing this week, look towards next week. Shore up your roster, your lineup, but get the depth you need. And that's why you have to keep looking at the waiver wire. I mean, if you're in the playoffs in the league, never stop trying to improve your team. And that's a bit of waiver wire tip here, closing the show for this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football. This has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.